On the morning of April 6, 1930, a frail man of 60 walked down to the sea on the coast of India. He wore a simple hand-spun cloth, and he had been walking on foot for 24 days. He stopped at the water's edge, bent down, and picked up a small lump of dried salt left behind by the tide. That was the crime. For that pinch of salt, the British Empire would throw more than 60,000 people into prison. The man was Mohandas Gandhi, and that single handful of salt helped bring down the largest empire the world had ever seen. Not gold, not weapons. Salt, the cheapest thing on your shelf. But for most of human history, salt was not cheap at all. It was one of the most valuable substances on Earth, and whoever controlled it controlled everyone. To see how a pinch of it could shake an empire, we have to leave that beach and go back 7,000 years into a mountain in the Alps to meet a dead man that salt refused to let rot. High in the Austrian Alps sits a town called Hallstatt, whose name simply means salt town. Beneath it runs the oldest salt mine on Earth, where people began cutting tunnels into the rock 7,000 years ago. The work was lethal. Tunnels caved in and buried the miners where they stood. But the salt did something eerie to their bodies. It dried them. It preserved them. It refused to let them decay. Thousands of years later, miners breaking into those old shafts began finding them. The bodies of workers who had died in the Bronze Age, skin and hair and clothing intact. One of the first was little more than a severed head and a single leg, still laced inside its leather boot, perfectly kept for 2,000 years by the very thing that killed him. Why would anyone die in the dark for white rock? Because a human body cannot run without it. Salt carries your nerve signals, moves your muscles, beats your heart, and a diet of farmed grain and bread, unlike a hunter's meat, never gave people enough. But salt did not only kill, it also built. Long before Rome, before the pyramids even, the oldest town in all of Europe rose on a Bulgarian hillside around a single industry, boiling spring water down into salt. Its people walled their settlement in heavy stone to guard the salt inside, traded it across the Balkans, and grew so rich that the graves nearby hold some of the oldest worked gold ever discovered anywhere on Earth. 7,000 years ago, before writing, before the wheel, salt was already making some men wealthy and others dead. And to reach it, people went to insane lengths. Nowhere more insane than in China. 2,000 years ago, Chinese engineers began drilling for salt buried deep underground, not digging, drilling, pounding a heavy iron bit into the rock over and over with bamboo derricks and human muscle. No steel and no engines anywhere. They went deeper every century. At a well called Shenhai, they finally punched through brine more than 3,000 feet down. The first hole in human history drilled past 1,000 meters, and they did it with cords of woven bamboo. The wells released something else too, natural gas. So they ran it through hundreds of miles of bamboo pipeline and burned it to boil the brine dry. A whole city grew up on those wells and named itself the Salt Capital. Over the centuries, it drilled more than 100,000 of them. But the real power of salt was never underground. It was what salt could do to a dead fish. In the 14th century, a Dutch fisherman named Willem Boykelsoen worked out how to gut and salt a herring right on the deck of a boat, slicing out the gills and curing the fish in brine the moment it was caught, before it had any chance to rot. That one trick, called gibbing, let the Dutch sell barrels of salted herring across Europe a full year after the catch. They built bigger boats to chase the shoals, then fleets, then a trading empire that circled the globe. and people said that Amsterdam itself was built on herring bones. Salt did not just season food, it let a small country turn a fish into a navy. And preserved food made salt worth a fortune everywhere. But in one place it was worth its exact weight in gold. In the 14th century, the traveler Ibn Battuta crossed the Sahara and wrote down what he saw: caravans of thousands of camels hauling great slabs of salt across the sand, and a desert town called Tagaza, where the houses and even the mosque were built out of blocks of salt, because there was nothing else to build with. That salt was carried south to the golden city of Timbuktu, and there it was traded against gold coming up from the kingdoms of West Africa, at times almost ounce for ounce. Think about that. A crystal you scrape off a dry lake bed, swapped straight across for the metal that kings killed for. To us, that sounds insane. But you cannot eat gold, and in a world with no refrigeration, salt was survival. In one place, salt did not just buy money, it was money. In the scorching Danakil Desert of Ethiopia, one of the hottest places on Earth, the Afar people have cut salt from the cracked ground for over 2,000 years and pressed it into standard rectangular blocks called amole. Those salt bars were spent as hard cash all across Ethiopia, well into the 20th century. You could pay for goods with slabs of salt, and camel caravans still haul them out of that desert today, 30 blocks to a camel, on a march of days to reach the markets, one of the very last salt caravans left on the planet. Salt even soaked into our language. The Romans built a road just to carry it, the Via Salaria, and gave us the word salary. You may have heard Roman soldiers were paid in salt, almost certainly a myth, but the word salary truly does come from the Latin for salt, and it is still hiding in your paycheck today. Rulers looked at all that value and wanted it for themselves. The first to seize it outright was the Chinese Emperor Wu. Around 119 BC, bankrupt from years of war in the north, he made salt a state monopoly. No one in the empire could produce or sell it but the government. It became the oldest monopoly on Earth, and one of the greatest money machines in history. In some later Chinese kingdoms, the salt tax alone brought in as much as 90% of all state income. Whole dynasties were floated on it. Half a world away, Venice ran the very same racket. The city we credit to spices actually rose on salt, forcing its merchants to haul salt back to the lagoon and reselling it at a fat profit that later bankrolled the fleets, which cornered the spice trade itself. In Poland, salt built kings. From the 13th century, the royal mine at Wieliczka, near Krakow, cut so deep and so vast that miners eventually carved an entire cathedral out of the salt underground. Altars, staircases, chandeliers, and statues, all of glittering rock salt, hundreds of feet below the surface. The wealth was staggering. Under King Casimir the Great, salt from these royal mines brought in as much as a third of the entire treasury of Poland and helped pay to found the country's very first university. But no one squeezed salt harder or crueler than France. Its salt tax was called the gabelle, and it did not merely tax salt, it forced people to buy it. Every person over the age of 8 was required by law to purchase a fixed ration of heavily taxed salt every single year, whether they needed it or not. And the price was rigged by region, so that the same salt could cost 20 times more on one side of a river than the other. So people smuggled. The smugglers were called the faux sauniers, and ordinary French people treated them not as criminals, but as heroes, while the state answered with the branding iron, the galleys, and the gallows. In the years before the Revolution, thousands were jailed over salt, and hundreds were chained to the oars of the galleys for life. When the monarchy finally fell in 1789, The hatred of the salt tax stood near the very top of the people's list of grievances. If your idea of salt is quietly falling apart right now, take 1 second and hit subscribe. We uncover the hidden history behind the everyday things in your kitchen every single week. Because salt did not stop at toppling a French king. It helped build, and nearly break, the United States. In the early 1800s, one American city rose on salt so completely that people simply called it the Salt City. That city was Syracuse, New York, built beside Onondaga Lake, where salty brine bubbled straight out of the ground. 2 settlers, Comfort Tyler and Asa Danforth, had started boiling that brine into salt in 1788, and the state soon taxed it heavily and poured the money into a wild gamble, a canal hundreds of miles long to link the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. When the Erie Canal opened in 1825 and turned America into a trading power, the people of Syracuse had a name for it. They called it the ditch that salt built. For most of the century, the majority of the salt in the entire United States came from that one city. Then salt turned into a weapon. When the Civil War came, salt cured the meat that fed the armies and tanned the leather for their boots. And the Union General, William Tecumseh Sherman, flatly declared that salt is eminently contraband, because an army that cannot preserve its food starves. The Confederacy's most important salt works stood at Saltville, Virginia. In 1864, Union forces fought their way into the valley and burned the works to the ground, choking the South's ability to feed its own soldiers. Salt was no longer just wealth, it was ammunition. Which brings us back to that beach in India in 1930. Under British law, the Salt Act, Indians were forbidden from collecting or making their own salt from their own sea. They were forced to buy it, taxed, from the very empire that ruled them. A nation wrapped in ocean, banned from the salt, drying on its own shore. Gandhi understood what no general did. Salt was the one injustice every single Indian could feel, rich or poor, and so he chose it as his weapon. On the 12th of March, he set out on foot with 78 followers. He walked for 24 days and nearly 240 miles, and as he went, the handful of marchers swelled into a river of thousands. On the 6th of April, he reached the sea and lifted that lump of salt from the sand. It was the signal. Across India, millions began making and selling their own salt in open defiance, and the empire jailed more than 60,000 of them, and every arrest only shamed it louder before a watching world. So how did the mineral that men killed for become the cheapest thing on your shelf? The answer is that we finally beat it. In the industrial age, machines drilled deep and pumped brine by the ton, and railways hauled mountains of salt for pennies until the scarcity that had ruled for 10,000 years simply collapsed. Then refrigeration finished the job. Salt's greatest task had always been keeping food from rotting, but once a humming machine in the kitchen could keep meat cold, the empire of salt was over. We use more salt than ever today. We just throw it under our feet now, by the ton, to melt the ice off our roads. So look at the grains in the shaker on your table. That same mineral preserved the dead in mountain tunnels, raised the first city in Europe, was drilled 1,000 meters down through cords of bamboo, built a Dutch empire on herring, was spent as hard cash in the Ethiopian desert, traded ounce for ounce with gold in Timbuktu, floated the dynasties of China, carved a cathedral under Poland, toppled a French king, built an American city, armed a civil war, and was lifted from a beach by a frail old man to shake the British Empire. The powerful were never really afraid of salt. They were afraid of controlling the one thing no human being can live without. And the day technology made it free, that ancient power simply dissolved, leaving nothing but plain white grains on your table with 10,000 years of blood and gold hidden inside them. Not bad for the cheapest thing in your kitchen. If this changed the way you see your own table, subscribe. We uncover the hidden history behind an everyday thing every single week. And tell us in the comments, what everyday thing should we uncover next? Your answer might just become our next story. This has been Origin Lore. The history of the world is hiding in the ordinary, and we will see you in the next one.